Alright, another edition of Draft Physics versus yeah, comments this time probably. And whatever might be an extension of that and such. Presentation. Yeah. Alright. So anyway, Donnie says, I would love to see you and Neil deGrasse Tyson talk on Star Talk. Yeah, I'd like to see anybody reasonable who just asks some reasonable questions and interrogates this, woo physics. That really is all weak evidenced, and somebody should just talk about how weak the evidence is for most of the extraordinary, all of the extraordinary claims they make. Yes, and how they stick to stuff where convenient. They stick to stuff that's 150 years old when they know that it's not likely that's very reliable. Because they didn't really understand how atoms were made and any of this other stuff. So when somebody says there's no magnetic monopoles, maybe they'll just think about it and say, well, what happens when you cut an atom in half? Atoms make magnets, of course. Yeah. They end up with one piece that has more electron in it and one piece with more proton in it. Anyway, although you all would agree, I don't know, what would you agree on? Yeah, that's right. Nothing. Neil would be positive for the most part. LOL. Whatever. You would bing. I would bing. I don't know. Sorry. Not a very useful comment, I'll say. Yes, that's what I'll say. I'll just remove it because it's not very useful. Thank you. Perv action. What a crinkled sheet of baking paper, parchment paper, I think, that's what we call it here, and some duct tape help your lighting situation. A curtain would work, but I don't feel like putting one up. And I'm trying to grow plants, keep them alive for the winter over there, and so I need the light, and I don't want to fiddle with something all the time. And it's only when the sun's out and it's a particular angle that it's a real problem. But yes, I could solve it. I'm just, it's awkward. The window is out of reach because I only have this one table to put all this crap on. So it's just a pain in the ass. But whatever, fine, okay. I've requested that if you have this kind of personal advice, you could just email it to me. You don't really have to make a public statement. Well, have you tried tying your shoes? Yeah. Anyway, if you tape a couple of skewers around the light source, well, I can't really do that. And gee, that sounds like a lot of work. Paper, and it does like diffusion. I don't have to tell you, of all people. Right, so you don't have to tell me. So, and you did it anyway. Thanks. I liked your video on heat. Give me a kind of mind blow expecting me to have. Gave me the kind of mind blow you expected me to have. Good. When you talked about sound being all sonic booms. Yes, exactly. It's all so different than what they're preaching. I mean, they just aren't even very close at all to the truth. But everybody's a minion. Everybody's a gang, sports fan. They're all just gangs. And so it's just until I have a gang that, you can't have a fair fight. But anyway, so Helen, the says, anonymous coward Helen, pretty much. But anyway, how do you explain the double and single slit patterns again? What do you mean again? Again? What, for you personally? I should make videos just for you personally. Do it again. Oh, Jesus. You never actually explain. Yeah, I do actually explain. I mean, I've made a whole bunch of assertions that are completely opposite from their assertions. I use language like, no, it's constructive reconstruction of a photon. And there's no destructive interference. There's just not remaking the photon. How your model answers this. So, yeah, of course, I've been over it in strangled detail. This is just a bullshit statement. I mean, completely, just an erroneously inaccurate statement. I mean, it's just how did you even put those words together in any kind of honest frame of mind? It's impossible. Oh, anyway, you expect us to just blindly... No, I'm not expecting any such thing. I've explained to you. So again, this isn't that complicated, right? There's two kinds of force, right? They both go the speed of light. They're identical in every respect, except electrons and protons can tell the difference. So it's like they're identical twins, except, mothers and fathers can tell them apart. They have one feature that's different. And protons and electrons react completely opposite to that difference. And then there's just those two interactions. There. That's it. That's the complete story of everything in the universe is right there. Okay? Two kinds of force that move the speed of light and are everywhere. They interact with two kinds of matter, protons and electrons, and they interact inversely in terms of how they react to the two forces. There. That's it. You expect us to blindly go along with anything you say. No, again, I'm pointing to the evidence. So how am I expecting you to blindly go along when I say things like, well, could you at least concede their evidence for their theories are weak? They have very weak evidence of the multiverse. They have very weak evidence that photons can do calculus and have radar. They have very weak evidence that photons ever bang into each other, in the sense that you can just shoot two lasers right at each other, and none of the photons are going to bounce off of each other. So there's a ton of experimental evidence for what I'm stating. All right. So there's no reason to go blindly. I've shown the experiments. I've shown the patterns. I've done the experiments myself. I mean, this is pathetically inaccurate crap you're typing. Okay, blindly go along with anything you say, but you don't demonstrate that anything you say is true. I demonstrate that it fits the evidence. The theory has to fit the evidence. There's no other job here. Your theory has to fit the evidence. I point out where theirs is missing the evidence, where the evidence is in contrary. That's why they have to say things like wave-particle duality, is because they can't do it right because they know the experiments don't indicate that it's clearly a wave or clearly a particle or clearly anything. I'm arguing, yes, the particle theory works if you actually make things particles, which they don't do because they keep giving things frequencies. They don't have frequencies and that kind of crap. So, all I have to do is give you a simpler model that meets the evidence. And that's what I've done. And you can pretend something else took place, but there's nothing else that took place. And your assertions are crap. You're the one who haven't evidenced. What fact or what statement have I made where I said blindly accept what I'm going to tell you? I'm telling you that if you use this model, it'll explain the experimental results. And I show you step by step how it does that. And here you are saying crap like this. I mean, people are so dishonest. Welcome to the channel. We have cookies and milk and lots of fun things. Yeah, well, whatever. God, I hate you people. Alright, another one by Helen. I don't know whether they're all in the same video. Let's see. Same video. Not a sign of a person who's very thoughtful. You misunderstand the principle of Occam's razor. Yeah, fuck you. Sorry, but it's just so pretentious. You're an authority from somewhere? Anyway. You say your model is simpler, therefore it's a better explanation of phenomenon, but you never define simple. I don't have to define simple. Use your own definition. Frankly. I mean, if your definition of simple is irrational, then fine. You go ahead. You're not going to get it anyway. If you can't define the word simple, if you don't understand the concept. Simple is a concept. If you don't understand the concept, then, of something that has more moving parts and something that has less moving parts, that kind of thing, then, yeah, forget it. There's no, why should I have a conversation with you? There's no point. You don't understand the word simple? You think it's a complicated concept? Simple is a complicated concept? Oh, shit. you just state this as an assertion. What did I state? I didn't force you to take my definition of simple. I'm saying there's a common understanding of the concept. You don't have that common understanding, okay, then we can't communicate really. You're just basically saying you're so alien from reality that you don't even accept concepts as existing, and that we can apply them consistently in different circumstances. So things like up and down and left and right don't mean anything to you because you're going to play some word game where you make left into a right. All right, anyway. With Occam's razor, it is really about is not adding assumptions. What Occam's razor is really about is not adding assumptions you don't need to the hypothesis. And again, isn't that basically saying the same thing? If you've reduced it to circle and square and said, okay, with those two concepts, I can make every other shape, or something like that, triangle and square and circle. Yeah, then you've gotten rid of all the superfluous, let's have all of these things to do all of these things. You're just getting back to something more elemental. And the whole argument here is about the elemental truth. What's the elemental function of the universe? Their theory is there's some separate thing called bent space. There's a separate thing called an electric field, a separate thing called a magnetic field. There's an electron field, there's a proton field, there's an anti-electron field, an anti-proton field. There's a field for 473 different stupid particles for which they have no idea what the hell they're doing. They just say, we found them when we crashed two things into each other. We say, we called that one that's squiggled out funny. We're calling that a thing. It's a real part. It really functions. It really does stuff. When, no, it's just crap. Pieces of crap. You don't need to have, okay. For instance, suppose, Alice and Bob, you're going to play these little games, are two philosophers from the Middle Ages, and they were deep in philosophical dispute on the case of gravity. Alice claims that gravity is a force that affects all matter in the universe and accounts for the motion of the planets as well as experiencing it. Bob, on the other hand, says gravity is a force that affects all matter in the universe, and it accounts for motion of the planets as well as the force of gravity we experience on Earth, and that the force is due to the influence of the angels. Well, the point is you have to explain where the energy comes from. So you're going to pretend that Bob's is the more complex answer because you don't need the angels. Well, the truth is you do need some explanation for how exactly the things are made to move. So again, it doesn't mean anything to say, well, they move because they move. So both of them have no answer. So there's no efficiency to be argued because neither one has described the truth. And at least Bob is providing some evidence for a mover, some place where the energy comes from. So he wins because at least his theory has some explanation for where the energy comes from. All right, this latter account is precisely the kind of hypothesis one seeks to avoid by following Occam's principle. And again, how you're avoiding what? You're avoiding getting to the subject. You're avoiding the very point of the practice, which is to accurately describe something. And if you're going to claim an accurate description, okay, it's not just about having superfluous elements, it's about having wrong elements. And obviously angels would be wrong. In practical application, it means never adopting a hypothesis with two assumptions when just one is sufficient to explain the phenomenon on observation. Well, ideally, you would have no assumptions. You'd be able to prove everything. But obviously, we can't do that because we don't have sufficient microscope for the purpose. So we do have to make some deductions, reasonable ones, about what the elemental function is. Now, the point being argued here is their elemental functions, first, are incompatible. Bent space and quantum mechanics, incompatible. So they have two theories, and they're in conflict with each other. So they're already in big trouble in terms of not answering the question, being wrong, being overtly wrong. Just as wave particle is not an answer to the question, what is it? It's not a wave particle. There's no such thing as a wave particle. All right, anyway. It means adopting the hypothesis with assumptions. Okay. Again, you have not defined simpler than. I don't need to define it. 2 plus 2 plus 2 physics. Theirs is 475 plus 76 plus 948, not plus 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 plus. They have tons of fields, tons of magical forces, no energy anywhere to be found, no explanation where the energy comes from to move magnets, no energy for moving planets into suns. It's just magical. Somehow the Earth knows there's a bent geodesic and it rolls down the bent geodesic. It's a silly explanation. It's not complete. And as pointed out, it's way too complex. I'm arguing my model answers the questions, and it does so insanely efficiently, in that there's only 2 force bits, 2 matter bits, and 2 interactions. And you're all done. If you obey the laws of those rules, you're done. Everything can be reduced to that function. The same force carrier is everywhere. The only difference between these are assertions. Do you have any counter argument? My assertion is that gravity and magnetism and electricity, they're all the same thing. And the only thing that makes a photon different is the fact that the quanta is at its precise frequency. And if you don't have that precise frequency, that is, if you don't have a long enough ray, or if the little bits are out of alignment, then it won't be a photon, but it's still energy. And it's the energy that is making magnets work, and it is the energy that is making the Earth fall into the sun. Alright, that's an argument from incredulity, and it's a fallacy. Well, fuck you. This is just gobbledygook. My theory is clearly... There's just no way to even fairly describe how much simpler the elemental functions are than theirs. It clearly wins in terms of being a theory that depends on 2 kinds of interaction. Okay, 2 things either hit and reflect, or 2 things hit and they go this way and that way. That's it. 2 functions. 2. Now why don't you show me how they have close to just 2 functions in their theory? Oh, God, you're just such a piece of shit. People. God, I hate people. So, whatever. I don't even use the Occam's razor thing all that much. I'm just saying that, rational deduction is, for people who have any knowledge of how science fundamentally works, is things are simpler as they go down. The elemental functions, like a car or anything else, it can be a complex object, but it's made out of simple mechanical pieces. And the same would be true for the universe. There's no homunculus. As you go down, you don't find little ants, running the universe. There's not some complex thing making the simple thing. Simple things make complex things. That's the rule. And that's the physics should know as soon as they start doing things like, well, a new universe is created, that they're kind of going into the wooey-verse, and that, they're not being connected anymore to this idea that somehow it gets simpler, not more complicated. All right. I really wish it wouldn't just, it always dumps me backwards. It's really irritating. I thought I just deleted this. Somebody just to state this assertion. Occam's razor is really about. I thought I just deleted that. I must have deleted something else. Well, too bad. Alright. Regarding heat, shouldn't the black holes... No, so we did this already. You forget. It always does it. I don't know why it does that. It's just part of the YouTube fun. Alright, why don't you just call it... See, there was another comment there. Well, sorry about that. I guess I missed that one because I deleted the wrong comment. I'll just have to think of what it was. Well, forget it. Why don't you just call it quits, man? Your whole philosophy movement is pretty much dead. The whole concept of having any kind of rational discourse in the human environment is dead. I mean, there are just... It's the whole political thing is so preposterous. You can see it everywhere. There's just this complete inability to communicate anywhere. So yeah, there's a complete communication and reality breakdown. There's never been more hypocrisy and duplicity just on the surface than there is right at this moment. So yes, it's a difficult time to attempt rational discourse with the human race, because you are a bunch of mobs who will defend your guy no matter what he does. Just doesn't fucking matter. And it's clear you're just all side choosers, and you're all too stupid to know what the goddamn truth is, so you don't even know who to pick to be your hero. You know, you're just pathetic. Anyway, I don't see anyone still talking about antinatalism. Well, that's just ironically stupid. I mean, there was just a couple of pretty prominent people that made videos in the last month. You know, the atheist guy, whatever his name was, and that other whatever guy, he's got, you know, whatever, 500,000 subscribers. So says you, I'll just say to that. I don't see anyone still talking about antinatalism. Pretty much confirms its status as a fad. So you didn't prove any of that. Clearly it's been a fad throughout history for periods, and it just depends on how intelligent people are, whether they can have the conversation. The very fact that we can have any conversation in the unintelligent environment buttholes like you have created, you know, what's the limelight might tick you off, whatever the fuck that, you know, it was some sort of Lyme disease joke or something. I mean, you know, what kind of a pathetic monster are you? Anyway, so clearly the losers who cling to it have moved on. Clearly you're an anonymous coward, clearly, to something else. Well, anyway, so obviously none of this has happened. So anyway, about 2 years ago, it seemed all your followers turned on you. I don't know. I didn't notice that, but whatever. The women went full radical feminazi. So this is somebody who's just scared of women. And the men all pretty much turned into MGTOW anti-circumcision loons. So somehow MGTOW and anti-circumcision are related concepts. No, I think they're exactly the opposite. I think you go survey the MGTOW people, they all big fans of their foreskin because they think it's the women that are imposing. I have to be more sanitary. I ain't doing that. I ain't cutting them no break. You know, they have to take it the way nature made it. I'm an ape man. You know, no willingness to conform to what the rules of civilization are. I mean, they probably refuse to take a bath now and then, and they think that's their right to be a stinker. So yeah, they can't possibly have anything to do with each other. Let's see. They probably have subsequently moved on to yet other things, probably involving a tailpipe and a garden hose. Well, it wouldn't be very effective anyway. And here we are with you ranting and raving against basically all of modern science. Well, I'm ranting and raving against what I'm pointing out to be dishonesty. All right, just a ton of dishonesty. They're selling their unevidenced crap as, you know, rock solid truth. They cite evidence that doesn't exist, experiments that were never performed. They way exaggerate the meaning of the experiments that are done, like LIGO and the black hole photo, and now they have a photo of an electron. Do you really think they took a picture of an electron? Do you think that's honest? That real scientists should say something like, if Faraday was alive today, or Newton, they'd think it's really cool that they say we photographed an electron, when you know that's not what it fucking is. I mean, do you really think they took a picture of an electron? Retard. Jesus Christ, you people are just so fucking dishonest. Of all the things to become, a time cube is pretty much the last thing I could ever expect you to become. A time cuber. Whatever the fuck that is. But yet it all seems as though it was inevitable. Everything was inevitable. Idiocracy was inevitable because smart people turned into assholes like you. I mean, here you have enough education, you can write, you got some vocabulary, and this is what you're doing with your time. You're devoting your brain space to lying and shystering and playing stupid word games. You know, you're the one that's crashing the human race. Your kind, your type. Okay. Anyway, just thought I'd stop by so I could laugh at the uh, derelict mishap of whatever this is, Brabelindungung proportions that is your existence. Well, whatever. Uh, the truth wins eventually. These little downturns, in human progress are just part of the process. The direction is still up. Intelligence will win in the end, and you will have your grave pissed on. So I'm satisfied that in the end you're going to be the loser, and you'll be properly titled what you were, which was a blight to the human race, a blight, a disgusting, fucking parasitic, pus-making infection. That it would have been much better if we never had the charm of your existence. Just a fact. You didn't. You disabled the human race, not abled it. All right, piece of scum. So we'll just hide that user because he can't even be bothered to have a screen name that's honest. He's such a dishonest piece of shit. Alright, so I guess we'll take a break and rant some more.
There's also then, of course, today YouTube channels. Some of the YouTube channels have way more subscribers than even I do, and even more groups out there. And the question today is, do we, how do we, and do we make an effort to get ourselves together? One of the things about historically is these groups were pretty much founded and run by and continue to be run by people who were mostly in their retirement age. This was not, young 20s, young 30s, young 40s, those kinds of people getting together and making these groups. Most of them were retired. Oh my gosh. They say it's because you need oxygen. I don't know if that's true if you're young, but basically the retired group of people are those people who don't have any attachments either financially or peer pressure from a work. For instance, Dr. Edward Dowdy, who worked from NASA, of course, it's not easy to have the views that he does, which is general relativity is wrong in the workplace that he has. So in the 1990s, 2020s, early 2000s, 1990s, early 2000s, we had these people and these groups surging and coming together. And I would say between the late 1990s and the early 2000s, we had some conferences we ever had. In the 1990s, the early 1990s, there was a pretty solid group of scientists, all dedicated in the beginning, really talking about relativity, and then of course it grew, and that was the MPA. And though it was really it was started by John Chappell, really because of the special and general relativity. But that again grew, and that conference, I would say the most people we had at our conference from our organization and not from others was maybe 80 or 90 people, maybe pushing 100, but I don't think so. It was between 40 and 60 people on the average in the 1990s, early 90s, and then in the late 90s we had upwards to maybe 70. And then we also had conferences with the Electric Universe, which were at the University of Maryland and also in Albuquerque, where we had not only the CNPS, actually we had four organizations. There was another organization that I'm not listing here. I guess that was still there, but very small organization. I think they had one with Tesla Tech just last year. Greg Volk, my comrade in arms, went there and told me they were there, but I can't remember the name of the group. Maybe somebody in the chat can remember who knows that was there. And we had Tesla Tech, which probably had maybe as close to 100 people. We had the Electric Universe, which had to have, at least 50 or 60 people there in the same way with us. So if you put all those people together, we had a conference, and it's held at the hotel in Albuquerque, New Mexico, and so we had a couple hundred people. And we would have a banquet. We had a banquet. The Tesla Tech pretty much had a big room, and they did their thing, and they had their breakout sessions, and we did as well. And then we had a banquet where we
So the Saturday Science Chat by the John Chappellers, which are predominantly, I think, creationists who are attempting to, change physics because they want to put God into it. The same with the Electric Universe, clearly. They just did a recent video where they're doing just like the creationists. They're trying to make all the events that took place on Earth fit into a 10,000 year time scale. Just for what reason would you even try to do that? Why would you even pretend it's possible? And, when there's evidence that's so glaring, like the Galapagos Islands, for example, where they've been volcanically created and they've actually moved. Okay, they've moved. And they're clearly very old. Some have very advanced vegetation, less and less and less based on their age, and, just clearly indicating this crap has been going on for a long time. I mean, little pieces of evidence like this, you could just pile them up. And, to propose a theory that is in such contradiction to so many provable facts, and you're just saying, how do people fall for that? Why would they listen to people who are using arguments that are so easily debunked? I mean, it might as well be flat earth assertions. And, the Hillster people are the same way. They make these extraordinary claims for, hyperboloids and all kinds of crap floating around, and they haven't got a single shred of one piece of evidence. And there's all this counter evidence where if it was doing that, then we'd be able to see it doing that. You can't have a really strong force, going whipping around something, a force strong enough to make magnetism or something like that, and there's no way of detecting it. It just doesn't, it's beyond incredible as a statement to think that, oh yeah, it doesn't have any other effect. It's magic force. You can't detect it any other way. Like putting an electron there and watching it get, move rapidly, or something in the flow, which it won't do. Anyway, it'll move rapidly right towards the opposite pole of the magnet. That's what it'll do. It'll move rapidly away from the negative pole. Anyway, it won't follow any currents. Oh, I didn't want to do that. I wanted to do this.
And those are personal things that we talk about, but the truth of the matter is people don't have the money, both retired people and the average person necessarily.
So he thinks this whole group thing, that we should all get energized behind some dissidence group. And I would say that would be possible if you just outline the subjects. Are you anti-relativity? What about quantum mechanics? What about, this guy claims there's no charge. How could you can't coexist with somebody claiming something preposterous. The phenomenon of charge is undeniable. The fact that electrons attract and repel based on charge is undeniable. And you have to have some explanation for how you can make those distinctions if you take away charge as a concept. Well, anyway. it's an extraordinary assertion. And so all these things are, so I can take a bunch of extraordinary assertions and put them into one group and say we're going to fight for extraordinary assertions. So you either just pick on, that is, you make claims against the, pointing out how weak the evidence for relativity is, in terms of it's just this little tiny bit of circumstantial stuff, and that they've never, it's almost, what's the point of arguing physics arguments where they'll say two different things? Like he'll bring up Dowdy, which he just did, who's arguing that there's no gravitational lensing, essentially. Photons aren't bent by gravity. And yet he'll use the bending of light as an argument for his own physics. So here he's supporting somebody who's saying it doesn't exist, and at the same time countering it by being completely the opposite opinion. And then saying, well, this is a good foundation for a group. It's not. It's fundamentally going to lead to dissension and conflict. So anyway, so he's lamenting the lack of ability to organize. We have to organize it under common interest, not uncommon interest. So if your interest is everybody gets to talk their shit, well, that's not going to go anywhere. So if you have to make it, the interest is tear down conventional physics, keep banging at its inadequacies, not that you have some model to replace it, but that you can point out how it's not enough evidence for conclusion. And then you can have an argument between yourselves once you've gotten that war won. You have to take things in the right order, and there's just no concession of his obligation to organize the project. The first project is to get heard. The second project is to get heard arguing against their crap, and then the third thing is to start giving people the right to propose their alternative theories.
Plenty is out there where we would, just because we're the CMPS, we have the ability and the know-how to do real in-person conferences. That's really my job. It's pretty much 100% of me. But it's not that hard to do today because there's lots of facilities just online. People can pay online, etc., etc. Well, maybe what we need to do is start thinking about the CMPS, saying, okay, we are going to make an effort,
way too boring. Okay, well, I'll listen to a little more, see if there's anything else that he says that could be of any value. But all this in-house crap is terribly uninteresting anyway, so I'll probably be back. So far so bad. Yeah, it's just mush. So he's talking now about opening his organization up to more lunatics. And that's the whole problem with the lunatics, is there's no editing. There's no... You have to have some control over the obviously not better. So if people are going to argue for a theory and it's worse than the conventional theory, it's more ludicrous, more unevidenced, makes claims that are plainly extraordinary and inconsistent with evidence, and they don't even cite any evidence. What's the point of that? That's just creating more noise, and it's just making it like, why would I want to go somewhere to support arguments that are worse than the ones made by conventional physics? No point in that.
What I would say is that we be so much into expansion tectonics, and they happen to see expansion tectonics, and I know that.
Yeah, so another completely unevidenced theory, in the sense that it just hasn't gone nearly far enough to demonstrate that you can overcome all of the evidence that the Earth is not expanding, get past all the barriers of how this expansion is in any way evidenced in the evolutionary record, or it has had any effect. The idea that gravity would be effectively changing over time, it's just nonsense on its face. It's so many ways to debunk it, and you're just really saying, well, because no one takes the time to debunk a useless pile of crap as a theory, it has to come already pre-debunked. You can't just say it's okay to make any kind of assertion and you don't have to defend it from critique. And that's the other part of it. They never answer any questions that are put to them. They just, well, I don't have to deal with drag. I don't have to do it. They do exactly the opposite of what I do every day, which is deal with the critics.
Were done by people who wanted to pull people's legs. And so their whole idea was to see how far they could go. Could they get people to follow it? How far? So it was an experiment in psychology.
Well, whatever. So now he's talking about flat Earth. Obviously, there's always some people who engineer a fad. In like crop circles, there was people who engineered the first. But it doesn't have anything to do with the fact that the followers just gravitate to anything anti and anything that might have the hope of making the world more of a crystal, more magic into their world. So obviously people who want to believe in God or some other kind of crap will gravitate to these wacky theories because the wackier, the more consistent with God. So the more unexplainable you can make something, the more likely it is there's a God that must have had to do it because it's unexplainable. That kind of garbage logic. Yeah, it's pathetically stupid.
There's two ways. Okay. Let me put it this way, in my opinion, and I'm discussing again, raise your hand or let me know if you want to be talking about this subject, because we have people here, not just me. Maybe I'll bring them. Yeah, I will.
Can't get anybody to talk to him now. Look, this whole they just kind of made a mess out of this whole science conference thing because they never have subjects. They never do what they need to do, which is talk things to death and figure out, well, what can we assert with some confidence. And they don't even bother making a list of their assertions with some confidence. That kind of thing. Well, anyway. Probably no point. So we'll just move on. Yeah. So till the next time, I guess I'll have to think about what my next move is. Some of the overview videos can be redone just because this new photon thing does change some of those arguments. So maybe I'll who knows. I haven't decided what to do. Bottom line is there needs to be a comparison between conventional theory and a better theory, and the only way you can really do that kind of comparison is you have to have somebody willing to defend the conventional theory. But anyway, until next time, and such, so forth and whatnot.